Michael Raines had everything most men dreamed of: money that could buy empires, cars that cost more than houses, and a mansion so large it echoed when he walked alone at night. But that was exactly the problem. It always echoed. The laughter, the voices, the warmth that used to fill it were gone. His wife had died 3 years ago, his son had left for another continent, and the only thing that remained loyal to him were the walls that whispered his loneliness back to him. Every night, he sat by the window with a glass of wine, watching the city lights below, tiny stars belonging to people who still had something to live for. He had wealth, yet not a reason to wake up. One cold night, as rain began to fall against the tall glass windows, Michael found himself standing in front of an old photograph. It showed him and his late wife, smiling outside a small diner before his company had taken over half the country. He remembered her last words before she passed: "You have everything, Michael, but not a soul left inside you." Those words haunted him like a ghost that refused to rest. He had built a life of steel and glass, but not one of love and purpose. That night, something inside him broke quietly. Without a plan, he went to his study and opened his laptop. He looked at the endless numbers, the files, the assets, all that defined him. And then he simply shut it down. For the first time in years, he didn't check the market, didn't send an email, didn't control anything. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small box. Inside it was a wrinkled note his wife had written when they first met: "If you ever lose your way, find the people who have nothing. They'll remind you what truly matters." Michael read it again and again until his eyes filled with tears. Then he made a decision that even he didn't understand. He packed a small bag, one change of clothes, a water bottle, and the photograph. He left his wallet, his phone, and every trace of his identity on the table. The mansion security cameras would show him walking out through the side gate, wearing a worn jacket and an old hat. No chauffeur, no guards, no announcement. Just a man stepping into the night. As the heavy rain poured down, he walked away from his empire. The streets grew darker, colder, rougher with every block. The glow of luxury towers turned into the dim flicker of broken streetlights. By midnight, Michael reached a part of the city he had only seen through tinted car windows. The air smelled of wet cardboard, gasoline, and hunger. Stray dogs wandered near trash bins. People wrapped in old blankets slept under bridges. He felt eyes watching him, suspicious and tired. A man in a torn coat asked if he had any spare change. For the first time in his life, Michael shook his head and meant it. "No," he whispered, voice trembling. He had left all his riches behind, and yet it was the first time he felt strangely free. He found an empty spot near a closed bakery and sat down. The cold concrete bit through his clothes. Rain dripped from his hair into his eyes. He watched the traffic lights blink and fade, the city slowing into silence. He tried to sleep, but the noise of distant sirens and his own racing thoughts kept him awake. Around him, shadows moved, people searching for food, warmth, safety. He was one of them now. He realized how fragile life truly was when stripped of its gold. He shivered and hugged himself, wondering if he'd made a mistake. Hours passed. The rain turned to mist. Michael's eyes grew heavy. He leaned back against the wall, closing them for a moment. That was when he heard footsteps, small, careful ones. A soft voice broke the silence. "You'll freeze out here, old man." Michael's eyes opened, startled. Standing in front of him was a boy, no older than 12, his skin dark, his clothes worn, but his eyes alive with something bright and fearless. He held a torn blanket and a small bag in his hand. Michael blinked in confusion. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough. The boy tilted his head and smiled faintly. "Someone who knows how to survive out here." "You clearly don't." The boy dropped the blanket beside him and stepped back. "Use that before you turn into ice." Michael hesitated, staring at the dirty, frayed cloth. He had once slept in silk sheets worth thousands, but at that moment, this old blanket felt like gold. "Thank you," he whispered quietly. The boy shrugged. Don't thank me. Just don't die here. He started to walk away, his small figure disappearing into the fog. Michael watched him go, unable to move. Something in that boy's voice, calm, strong, wise beyond his years, stirred something deep inside him. He wrapped the blanket around himself, feeling its rough texture against his skin. It smelled of the streets, of smoke and life. He looked at the city skyline glowing far away, where his name still stood in lights on top of glass towers. But down here, no one knew him. No one cared about his billions or his company. He was just another man trying to make it through the night. The strange piece of that thought sank into his heart. For the first time in decades, Michael Rains, the man the world called untouchable, felt human. As he drifted towards sleep, he caught one last glimpse of that small boy's shadow turning a corner, vanishing into the night. Michael didn't know it yet, but the boy who gave him a blanket had just handed him something far more valuable, his first lesson in what it truly meant to live. When morning came, the city woke with a roar, cars honking, vendors shouting, people rushing to work. But Michael Rains sat motionless in the corner beside the old bakery, his body stiff and aching from the cold ground. His clothes were soaked, his stomach empty, and his pride wounded. He had once owned this city. Now he was invisible to it. People passed by him without a glance. The same man who had been on magazine covers now looked like a forgotten ghost among the living. He touched the worn blanket around him, remembering the small boy who had appeared in the rain. The boy's voice still echoed in his mind, "You'll freeze out here, old man." Michael stood up slowly, brushing off the dust from his jacket, and began walking through narrow streets filled with noise and smells he'd never known. Trash overflowed from bins, old posters peeled off the walls, and stray cats darted between his feet. For the first time, he saw the city from the ground, the side he had ignored from his tower above. He searched the streets with his tired eyes, hoping to find the boy again, but all he saw were faces lost in survival. Every face had a story, and every story was hidden behind hunger. As noon approached, his hunger grew unbearable. He hadn't eaten since the night before. When he walked past a soup kitchen, he hesitated outside the line of homeless people. The smell of warm bread filled the air. A volunteer waved him in, but shame rooted him to the sidewalk. He couldn't bring himself to accept food for free. The billionaire in him still whispered, "You don't belong here." So he turned away. His legs trembled as he walked aimlessly until he stumbled into a narrow alley hidden between tall buildings. There, he saw the boy again. The same dark-skinned child from the night before, crouched beside a trash can, holding a sandwich wrapped in foil. The boy looked up, instantly recognizing him. "Didn't I tell you not to freeze?" he said with a smirk. Michael let out a weak laugh. "I guess I tried my best." The boy tore the sandwich in half and handed one piece to him. "Eat. You look like you haven't had anything since forever." Michael hesitated again, but hunger won the battle. He took the sandwich and sat beside the boy. It was cold and simple, just bread and peanut butter, but it felt like a feast. They ate in silence for a while. Michael studied the boy, curious. His clothes were torn, his shoes too big, and his face far too serious for someone his age. Yet there was a spark in his eyes, a kind of wisdom that only pain could teach. "What's your name?" Michael finally asked. The boy wiped his hands on his pants. "Trey," he said shortly. "You live out here?" Michael asked. Trey shrugged. "Been here a while. People come and go. I stay." Michael wanted to ask more, but Trey's tone made him stop. There was pride in his voice, strong, quiet pride that said he didn't need pity. "How old are you?" Michael tried again. 12, Trey replied, looking him up and down. "And you? You don't look like you belong out here." Michael forced a small smile. "Maybe I'm trying to learn how to belong." Trey frowned. "Nobody wants to belong here. You either got nowhere to go, or nowhere left to run from. His words hit deeper than Michael expected. For the rest of the day, Trey moved like someone who knew every hidden corner of the streets. He showed Michael where to find clean water, where to stay safe from trouble, and which people to avoid when the sun went down. The streets got rules, Trey said. Number 1, don't trust anyone too fast. Number 2, don't look too clean, or they'll think you're hiding money. Number 3, always keep moving. Michael followed him like a student, listening carefully. It was strange, he had once taught powerful men how to lead. Now a 12-year-old was teaching him how to survive. As evening came, Trey led him deeper into the alleys. You need a place to sleep, the boy said. Come on. They reached an old subway entrance sealed off years ago. The stairs led into darkness, but faint lights flickered below. Michael hesitated. What is this place? Trey looked back at him and said softly, home. They walked down into the forgotten tunnels, where the air was damp and heavy. As Michael's eyes adjusted, he saw what Trey meant, dozens of people living in makeshift shelters made from cardboard, plastic, and old furniture. Children laughed, women cooked over small fires, and old men mended clothes. It wasn't much, but it was life. Trey waved to a woman who handed him a bowl of soup. They take care of each other here, he said. If you don't cause trouble, they'll let you stay. Michael stared at the scene, speechless. He had spent his life building towers of glass, believing he understood the world. But here, underground, in the darkness, people with nothing had built something he had never managed to: community. Later, when everyone settled down for the night, Trey gave him a spot beside his own sleeping mat. The noise of dripping water echoed through the tunnel. Michael lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind spinning. The boy beside him slept peacefully, breathing slow and steady. Michael whispered to himself, "You shouldn't be here, kid. You deserve better." But the truth was painful. Trey might deserve better, but no one had ever given it to him. As the last of the firelight faded, Michael turned to look at Trey's small figure curled under a blanket. Somewhere deep inside, a feeling began to grow, something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't pity. It wasn't fear. It was connection. He realized this boy wasn't just helping him survive the streets, he was forcing him to face everything he'd ignored his whole life. Before sleep finally took him, Michael whispered a promise he didn't fully understand: "I'll make this right, somehow." Far above them, the city lights continued to shine, but down in the forgotten tunnels, something far more powerful was beginning: a bond between a lost man and a forgotten child, two souls who would soon change each other's worlds forever. The sound of dripping water was the first thing Michael heard when he opened his eyes. The tunnel was dim and cold, but alive with quiet movement. Men were stoking small fires, women wrapped children in old blankets, and the air smelled of smoke and damp earth. For a moment, Michael forgot who he was. The soft murmur of people waking up around him felt strangely peaceful, as if the world above didn't exist. Then Trey nudged his shoulder. "You sleep heavy," the boy said, grinning. "You're lucky nobody took your shoes." Michael sat up, rubbing his tired eyes. His body ached from the hard ground, but there was a strange comfort in it. "I guess I still have a lot to learn," he replied. Trey tossed him a small piece of bread. "Eat. We share here. That's rule number 4. Michael looked around. Everyone seemed to be sharing something: food, blankets, even smiles. There was no money, no power, no status. Just survival, and a kind of respect born from it. "Who runs this place?" he asked. Trey shrugged. "Nobody. Everyone takes care of everyone. You mess that up, you're out." As the morning passed, Michael walked through the tunnels, taking it all in. The walls were covered in graffiti and messages written by people who had come and gone. "Keep going. Don't give up. We're still human." He saw a man fixing a broken pipe, another sewing a torn jacket for a woman nearby. A little girl with tangled hair was drawing on the concrete with a piece of chalk, smiling as if she didn't know the world outside had forgotten her. It hit Michael hard. How could people with nothing still find a reason to smile? Trey followed him closely. "You look shocked," he said. Michael nodded slowly. "I've lived my whole life trying to build a world better than this," he whispered, "and I ended up making it worse." Trey frowned, not understanding. "You talk like you had power or something." Michael smiled weakly. "Once upon a time. I did." Trey studied him, suspicion flashing in his eyes. "You don't look like it now." Michael laughed softly. "Good. Maybe that's for the best." They spent the day helping where they could. Trey showed him how to light a fire with wet wood, how to trade favors for food, and how to keep away from the gangs that controlled certain parts of the tunnels. Michael listened, learned, and worked. When a pipe burst, flooding one side of the camp, he instinctively took charge, directing people, fixing leaks, finding tools. Years of leading companies had trained him to solve problems fast. The people around him noticed, whispering, impressed by how quickly the new guy made things work. That night, as they sat by a small fire, Trey handed him a cup of warm soup. "You're different," he said simply. "Most people who end up here just give up. But you fight. Why?" Michael stared into the fire, the flames reflecting in his tired eyes. "Because giving up is easy," he said softly. "I've done that for too long." Trey nodded slowly, accepting the answer, then changed the subject. "You ever been rich?" The question made Michael freeze. For a second, he saw flashes, luxury dinners, private jets, endless meetings. He almost said yes, but the word stuck in his throat. "Not really," he lied. "I just had enough once." Trey looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "You talk like you lost something important." Michael didn't reply. He just watched the flames dance and thought of his wife's smile, her last words echoing in his mind. "Find your soul before it's too late." Maybe that was what this was all about, finding the pieces of himself he had thrown away chasing numbers and fame. Days turned into weeks. Michael began to blend in with the others. He learned to carry water buckets, patch leaks, and share food without hesitation. People started trusting him. He fixed broken lights, built wooden crates for storage, and even found a way to make the air vents flow better. In return, he got respect, not for his money, but for his heart. For the first time in years, he felt needed, not because of what he owned, but because of what he gave. But not everything underground was peaceful. Some nights, distant noises echoed through the tunnels, shouts, running footsteps, the sounds of fights breaking out in the darker parts of the underground. Trey warned him to stay close. "The gang runs the south tunnels," he said. "They don't like outsiders." Michael nodded, but worry crept into his chest. He noticed how Trey often disappeared for hours, returning with food or supplies. One night, he followed him quietly and saw the boy trading scavenged goods with dangerous-looking men for a few cans of food. His heart clenched. Trey was risking his life just to feed others. When Trey returned, Michael confronted him. "You shouldn't be doing that. It's dangerous." The boy shrugged. "People gotta eat. Someone's gotta do it." Michael sighed, frustrated and amazed at the same time. "You're just a kid." Trey looked him in the eye, his expression hard. "Out here, nobody's just a kid. You grow up fast or you don't survive." His voice cracked slightly, but he turned away before Michael could see the sadness in his eyes. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He watched Trey from across the fire, realizing how much strength the boy carried in that small body. He had built an empire from comfort, yet this child had built one from nothing but courage. He thought of all the people he had ignored while chasing success, all the faces behind the statistics he never cared about. He finally understood what his wife had tried to tell him. Money didn't make you rich, connection did. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the tunnel. People screamed. Michael jumped to his feet. Flashlights flickered in the darkness. Trey ran forward to see what was happening. A gang of men stormed into the camp, shouting, demanding food and supplies. Michael's heart pounded as chaos spread. One of the men pushed Trey aside, kicking over a pot of soup. Michael rushed forward, yelling, "Stop," but the gang leader turned on him with a cruel grin. "Old man, you want to be a hero?" Before Michael could react, Trey threw himself between them, pushing the man away. The gang member swung his arm, hitting Trey hard across the face. The boy fell to the ground. Michael froze in horror as blood trickled down Trey's cheek. "Leave him," he shouted, trying to help, but the gang laughed and backed away, taking what they wanted before disappearing into the shadows. The tunnel fell silent except for the sound of dripping water. Michael dropped to his knees beside Trey, his hands shaking. "Hey, kid, stay with me," he said, voice trembling. Trey blinked weakly, whispering, "Told you, don't trust anyone too fast." Then he passed out. Michael looked around helplessly, fear clawing at his chest. For the first time in his life, he didn't have power, money, or control, just the desperate need to save a boy who had become his only friend. In the darkness of the underground, the billionaire who once ruled cities now knelt beside a bleeding child, realizing he was no longer running from his old life, he was being reborn from it. The night stretched on endlessly. The tunnels that once felt like a hidden world now pulsed with fear and pain. Michael sat beside Trey, pressing a piece of torn cloth against the boy's wound. The faint light of a dying fire cast trembling shadows across the tunnel walls. Trey's small body shivered under the thin blanket, his breathing shallow but steady. Around them, a few of the homeless gathered quietly, their eyes full of worry and helplessness. None of them had real medicine or strength left to give. Michael looked around desperately. "Someone must know a doctor," he shouted, but his voice echoed and died in the damp air. An old man stepped forward and shook his head. "Down here, we fix what we can. But the rest," he didn't finish the sentence. Michael's throat tightened. He looked down at Trey, this boy who had saved him, fed him, taught him how to live again, and felt something heavy break inside him. He had once signed checks worth millions without thinking twice. He had funded research, built hospitals, donated for publicity. Yet now, with all that behind him, he couldn't even save one injured boy. His hands trembled as he whispered, "Don't you dare die on me, kid." Trey's eyelids fluttered, his voice barely audible. "I've been through worse." Michael tried to smile, but his eyes burned with tears. "Yeah? You better keep that attitude." Hours passed. The fire went out. Michael sat in silence, his mind racing. He thought of his old life, of luxury, comfort, and distance. He had lived behind glass walls, safe from pain. But here, in this darkness, pain had become real. It was human, raw, and unbearable. He could no longer hide behind money. Finally, he made a decision. "I'll find help," he said, standing up. "I'll bring medicine." A woman nearby warned, "You'll get robbed out there at night." But Michael didn't listen. He wrapped his jacket tight and stepped out of the tunnels, climbing into the wet, empty streets above. The city was silent under the rain. The streets glistened under flickering streetlights, every shadow whispering danger. Michael moved fast, his heart pounding. He searched the alleys for anything, a pharmacy, a clinic, a kind face, but every door was locked, every window barred. The city didn't open its heart at night, not for the forgotten. Then he saw it, a small corner store with a faded red cross on its sign. The door was half open. Inside, an old man was sweeping the floor. Michael stepped in, shivering. "Please," he said breathlessly. "I need something, antibiotics, bandages, anything." The shopkeeper eyed his dirty clothes suspiciously. "You got money?" Michael hesitated. Of course he didn't. All his wealth was gone by choice, left behind like a dream. "No," he said, voice breaking. "But there's a boy, he's hurt. Please, I'll do anything." The man sighed and turned away. "I'm sorry. Business is business." For a long moment, Michael stood frozen. Then he noticed his wristwatch, the last thing of value he owned, gold and elegant even through the grime. He tore it off and placed it on the counter. "Take it. Just help me." The shopkeeper frowned, then slowly nodded. He gathered a small box, medicine, alcohol, bandages, and handed it over. "This is all I can spare." Michael grabbed it with trembling hands. "Thank you." As he turned to leave, the man said quietly, "You don't look like you belong down there. Be careful." Michael didn't answer. He ran through the rain, clutching the box close to his chest like treasure. When he returned to the tunnels, Trey was still breathing, but weak. The others moved aside as Michael knelt beside him and began cleaning the wound. The alcohol burned, and Trey stirred, groaning softly. "Easy, kid," Michael whispered. "I got you." His hands shook, but he kept going, bandaging, cleaning, praying silently. He had never prayed before. Not once since his wife died. But now he found himself whispering, "Please. Don't take him. Not him." The night crawled on. Every minute felt like an hour. Michael stayed awake, watching Trey's chest rise and fall. At some point, exhaustion pulled him down beside the boy, and he drifted into a restless sleep. He dreamed of his wife standing in the rain, whispering her same old words, "You have everything, Michael, but not a soul." He woke with tears on his face and a whisper on his lips, "I'm trying." By morning, Trey's color had returned. His breathing was steadier, his eyes half open. Michael smiled in relief. "Hey there, hero," he said softly. "You scared me." Trey blinked weakly. "Told you. I don't die easy." Michael laughed, but his heart ached with guilt and love he couldn't explain. "Yeah, well, don't make a habit of it." For 2 days, Michael stayed by Trey's side, feeding him little, keeping him warm, doing everything he could. But one morning, when he woke up, Trey's spot was empty. The blanket was folded neatly, and beside it was a small note. Michael unfolded it with trembling hands. "Don't look for me. You don't belong here. You got a life somewhere, go find it." Michael froze. He read it again, his chest tightening. Trey was gone. He looked around the camp, asking everyone, but no one had seen the boy leave. Some said they heard footsteps at dawn, others said he went toward the old subway exit. Michael ran through the tunnels, shouting his name, his voice echoing back at him. "Trey! Trey, where are you?" But there was only silence. He stood there in the dim light, breathing hard, holding the note against his heart. The boy who had saved him, taught him, and shown him what it meant to care, was gone. For the first time, Michael didn't feel like a billionaire pretending to be poor. He felt like a man who had lost something real. Above ground, the city moved on, cars, noise, money, life. But down below, in the quiet tunnels, Michael sat alone, staring at the empty blanket and whispering, "I should have never let you go." He didn't know it yet, but his search for Trey was only beginning, and it would take him back into a world he had abandoned, forcing him to face not only the boy's truth but his own. Days passed like ghosts. The tunnels felt emptier without Trey's laughter echoing in the darkness. The fire still burned at night, but its warmth no longer reached Michael's heart. He wandered through the underground world with the boy's folded note always in his pocket, reading it again and again until the edges began to tear. "Don't look for me. You don't belong here." But Michael couldn't obey those words. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Trey's face, the stubborn grin, the fearless eyes, and the thought of him alone somewhere on these dangerous streets tore through him like glass. He packed what little he had, a blanket, a bottle of water, and the last piece of bread from the shelter. Then he left the tunnels behind. The cold air hit his face as he stepped back into the daylight. The city was alive and loud, a place that once bowed to him but now looked right through him. His hair was longer, his clothes worn, and his face hidden under the shadow of a hood. No one recognized the billionaire who had once ruled these streets from a penthouse high above. He was invisible, and maybe for the first time, he liked it that way. He started the search in the alleys where they'd first met. He asked strangers, shopkeepers, even the men sleeping under bridges. Most just shrugged, a few turned away. "A kid named Trey?" he asked again and again. One old woman pointed toward the south end of the city. "There are kids there," she said softly. "Some of them get caught stealing food. If he's out here alone, he won't last long." Michael thanked her and moved on. His shoes were torn, his hands shaking from hunger, but he didn't stop. He had walked away from billions, but now he'd give anything for one more chance to find that boy. As he moved deeper into the city, he started to see signs of his old life again. Billboards with his company's logo, glossy magazines with his face printed on them. Michael Raines missing for 3 weeks, police still searching. He stood before one of the posters in disbelief. The man in the photograph looked polished, perfect, powerful, and completely hollow. "That man's dead," he murmured, turning away. He hid from the eyes of the world, ducking into side streets and markets where nobody would recognize him. Every time he saw someone in a suit or a luxury car, he felt like an intruder from another lifetime. But every step brought him closer to the city's broken heart, the places where the homeless gathered, where children vanished, and where the police rarely came. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, he reached a crowded square near an abandoned train station. There were people huddled on the sidewalks, begging, trading, fighting to survive. Michael moved among them quietly, scanning every face. He stopped near a young man handing out food. "Have you seen a boy named Trey?" he asked. The man thought for a moment. "Dark skin, skinny, maybe 12? "Yeah, I've seen him a few times. Tough kid. He helps the little ones." "Where?" Michael asked urgently. The man pointed toward the old rail yard. "But you better hurry. The cops been rounding up kids there lately." Michael's heart pounded as he ran toward the rail yard. His legs ached, his lungs burned, but he didn't care. The closer he got, the louder the noise became, shouting, sirens, crying. He reached the edge of the yard just in time to see a line of officers corralling a group of children near a fence. Among them was a small figure struggling, shouting at the officers to let the others go. Even from a distance, Michael knew that voice. "Trey. Stop!" Michael shouted, sprinting forward. The officers turned, startled. "That boy's with me," he yelled, pushing through the crowd. One officer raised a hand to stop him. "Step back, sir. This isn't your concern." Michael's breath came fast, his heart pounding. "You don't understand. He's not a criminal, he's a child." Trey looked up, eyes wide with disbelief. "Michael?" he whispered. The officer frowned, recognizing the name. "Wait. Michael Raines? The missing billionaire?" Cameras flashed from nearby reporters who had gathered for the police raid. Michael froze, the sound of his name slicing through the chaos. In seconds, the disguise he'd lived under shattered. The officers exchanged glances. One of them lowered his voice. "Mr. Raines, what the hell are you doing here?" Michael looked down at Trey, his clothes dirty, his wrists in cuffs. His voice cracked as he said, looking for him. The cameras zoomed in, catching every word, every tear. "This boy saved my life," he said, voice trembling but steady. "He showed me what it means to be human when I'd forgotten." The crowd murmured. The officer hesitated. Trey stared up at him, speechless. Michael turned to the officers, his tone fierce now. "If you arrest him, you'll answer to me." Not as a billionaire, not as a name, but as a man who owes his soul to that child. The police backed off, unsure, while the reporters surged forward. Microphones and cameras surrounded him. "Mr. Rains, where have you been? Is this boy really homeless? Why were you living on the streets?" Michael stood tall, shielding Trey with his arm. His clothes were soaked, his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with something powerful: truth. "I left my fortune to understand the world I helped break," he said firmly. "I found a boy who gave me something money never could: compassion. And I won't let this city throw him away." Trey looked at him in disbelief. "You're really rich?" he asked softly. Michael turned to him, his eyes shining. "I was. But you made me realize what rich actually means." The police finally removed Trey's cuffs. Michael helped him up gently, the cameras flashing around them like lightning. Reporters shouted, the world watched, and in that single moment, the story of the missing billionaire turned into something far greater: a story of redemption, humanity, and a bond that had defied everything. Michael placed a hand on Trey's shoulder and whispered, "You're coming with me now." But Trey's voice shook. "You don't have to do this. You don't owe me anything." Michael smiled faintly. "No, Trey. You don't understand. You didn't just save my life, you gave it back to me." As they walked away through the sea of flashing lights, the rain began to fall again, soft, cleansing, and endless. For the first time, Michael didn't hide from it. He tilted his head upward, feeling the drops run down his face. Around him, people were shouting his name, calling him a hero, a mystery, a miracle. But he didn't hear them. All he could hear was Trey's small, quiet voice beside him: "Told you not to freeze out here." Michael laughed through his tears, whispering back, "Guess I didn't listen very well." Neither of them knew it yet, but that night would mark the beginning of something bigger than both of them, a truth that would soon shake the entire city and change Michael Rains' name forever. The world woke up to a story it could hardly believe. News outlets flashed headlines across every screen: "Missing billionaire found living among the homeless, saved by a street kid." The photos showed Michael Rains in tattered clothes, holding Trey's hand as the rain fell around them. Some called it madness, others called it a miracle. But to Michael, it was neither. It was just truth. By the next morning, his old world came crashing back. Limousines lined the street outside the small community shelter where Michael and Trey had spent the night. Reporters surrounded the entrance, shouting questions. "Mr. Rains, why did you give up your fortune? Who is the boy? Are you returning to your company?" Michael shielded Trey from the flashing cameras as his old business partner, Richard Hale, pushed through the crowd. "Michael," he called, voice filled with disbelief. "My God, is that really you?" Michael nodded, his expression calm but unreadable. Richard stared at his worn clothes, the dirt on his hands. "You vanished for a month. The board's been in chaos. Everyone thought you were dead." Michael just gave a small smile. "Maybe I was," he said softly. "Until I met him." He looked down at Trey, who stood silently beside him, gripping his sleeve. Richard's confusion deepened. "Michael, we need to get you home. You can't stay here." But Michael didn't move. "Home," he repeated quietly. "That mansion isn't my home anymore, Richard. Not after what I've seen." Later that day, Michael agreed to meet a small group of journalists inside the shelter, on one condition: no cameras pointed at the homeless. He sat on a simple wooden chair while Trey sat near the corner, keeping his eyes on him. "I didn't disappear," Michael began, voice steady but emotional. "I walked away. I wanted to see what life looked like from the other side of my money. And I found something far more valuable than I ever imagined." He told them everything. The night he left his mansion. The cold, the hunger, the fear. The boy who gave him a blanket when he had nothing left. As he spoke, the reporters grew quiet. This child taught me that humanity isn't something you buy, Michael said. It's something you give, even when you have nothing. One of the reporters leaned forward. Mr. Rains, what happens now? You can't live here forever. Michael looked around the crowded shelter, the tired faces, the quiet desperation, the hope that flickered faintly in the dark. No, he said. But I can make sure they don't have to. That night, he returned briefly to his mansion. Cameras followed as the massive iron gates opened. Inside, everything was exactly as he had left it, silent, perfect, empty. He walked through the halls slowly, his footsteps echoing. The paintings, the marble floors, the chandeliers, all of it felt meaningless now. He paused in front of his wife's old photograph. You were right, he whispered. I lost my way. But I found it again, in a boy who had nothing. He picked up a pen and signed a stack of papers that his legal team had brought. His company's fortune, billions in assets, properties, and cash, was being divided into a new foundation, the Rains Hope Initiative. Its mission was clear: housing, education, and rehabilitation for the homeless, especially children. Trey would be the first youth advisor. When Trey heard about it, he couldn't believe it. You're really giving all that money away? He asked in disbelief. Michael smiled. I didn't give it away, Trey. I just gave it back, to the people it should have helped all along. But while the world praised his generosity, not everyone celebrated. Behind closed doors, powerful men whispered in boardrooms. Richard Hale and several executives from Michael's empire met in secret. He's lost his mind, one of them said angrily. He's giving away everything we built. Richard frowned, staring at the headlines. If he keeps this up, the company will collapse. Investors are already panicking. So what do we do? Another asked. Richard's eyes narrowed. We stop him. Meanwhile, Michael and Trey worked tirelessly in the streets. They visited shelters, schools, and orphanages, talking to people who had been forgotten. Trey led Michael through hidden corners of the city, places even he didn't know existed. You see this spot? Trey said one night, pointing under a bridge. We used to sleep here when it rained. Sometimes the cops came. Sometimes worse. Michael's heart broke a little more every time he listened. But he also saw something else, a fire in these people. They hadn't given up. We'll build something here, he told Trey, looking around. A place where they're safe. Where no one gets turned away. Trey's face lit up. For real? For real, Michael said, smiling. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The foundation grew fast, supported by millions in donations from around the world. People were inspired by the story of the billionaire and the street boy. Together, they were building something powerful, a movement that gave hope to those who had been invisible. But late one night, as Michael was reviewing plans for the first housing center, a message flashed across his old company's communication line. It was short and cold: you're destroying what we built. Step down, or we'll make sure you do. Michael stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. Trey, who sat nearby drawing on a scrap of paper, looked up. What's wrong? Michael smiled faintly, trying to hide the worry. Nothing you need to worry about. But deep down, he knew this was the start of something dangerous. His old world, the world of money, greed, and power, wasn't going to let him go that easily. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, and rain began to fall again. Trey looked out the window. Another storm? Michael nodded slowly. Yes, he said quietly. But this time, I'm not running from it. As lightning flashed across the skyline, he knew the road ahead would test everything he'd learned. He had walked away from wealth to find humanity, but now he'd have to fight his own empire to protect it. And this time, he wouldn't be fighting alone. Trey was at his side. And together, they were about to face the storm that would decide everything. The first thunder cracked over the city like a warning shot. Michael Raines stood on the rooftop of an unfinished shelter, the night wind tearing through his coat, his eyes fixed on the skyline that once symbolized everything he'd built and lost. Below, the streets glowed with blue and red lights. Reporters, protesters, and workers all gathered around the construction site of the first Raines Hope Center. It was supposed to open in 3 days. But now, it stood at the heart of a war he never wanted to fight. "Michael," a voice shouted from behind him. Trey climbed up the metal stairs, rain soaking his thin jacket. "They're outside again," he said, panting. "Those guys from your old company. They're saying you don't own any of this anymore." Michael turned slowly, his face calm but his eyes cold. "They're wrong," he said. "I may not own it on paper, but this," he gestured to the half-built shelter, "belongs to the people now. And I won't let them take it back." Trey frowned, his small fists clenched. "Why do they hate what you're doing?" "Because compassion doesn't make them money," Michael said quietly. "And greed never forgives those who walk away from it." Down below, a group of men in suits stood beneath umbrellas, shouting to the press that the foundation was illegally funded and that Michael Raines was mentally unstable. They held legal documents, threats, and lies ready to destroy everything he had worked for. That night, Michael met with his lawyers and advisors, people who had stood by him since the beginning of his foundation. The tension in the room was sharp. "They're using your disappearance against you," one lawyer said. "They're claiming you're unfit to manage finances. If they win this injunction, they'll freeze every account tied to your name." Michael sat back, rubbing his temples. "So everything we've built, every shelter, every child's home, goes dark overnight?" "Yes," the lawyer said grimly. Trey, sitting in the corner, spoke up suddenly. "Then we don't stop building," he said. The adults turned toward him. "We keep working. People like me, we didn't survive because of papers or rules. We survived because someone cared." Michael looked at him, eyes softening. "You're right," he said. "And they can't stop that." The next morning, the storm broke in full. Media events flooded the streets, protesters held signs both for and against Michael. Some said hero of the people. Others said billionaire gone mad. Helicopters buzzed overhead. The city was divided, but watching. Inside the shelter, Michael stood on a small platform, surrounded by workers and volunteers. The rain pounded on the metal roof. "They can take away our money," he said, raising his voice over the storm, "but they can't take away what this means. They can't erase the truth that every one of you matters." Cheers erupted from the crowd, their voices echoing through the half-built walls. Trey stood beside him, holding the microphone cord like it was a lifeline. "We're not stopping," Michael said. "We finish this center. Tonight." And they did. Under the rain and lightning, men and women worked through the night, hammering, welding, painting, carrying supplies. Trey ran between them, handing out food and tools, his energy unstoppable. The cameras caught everything, the billionaire in soaked clothes, working side by side with the homeless he once ignored. The story spread across the world. But as dawn broke, black cars appeared at the edge of the site. Michael's old partner, Richard Hale, stepped out, flanked by lawyers and police officers. "This ends now," Richard shouted, his voice cutting through the wind. "You're trespassing on corporate property. The board has voted, you're removed from all leadership positions." Michael walked toward him slowly, his clothes dripping, his hands steady. "You can remove my name," he said. "But you can't remove what this has become." Richard held up a document. "Legally, this land, this construction, everything, still belongs to Raines Industries. We're taking it back." Trey stepped forward, glaring. "You're taking it from the people," he shouted. "You rich guys already have everything, why take this too?" Richard hesitated, glancing at the cameras that were already filming the confrontation. Michael looked at him with calm defiance. "You taught me how to build empires, Richard. But you never understood what they were for. The crowd began chanting. Let them build! Let them build! The police officers looked uneasy. The storm, the people, the cameras, it was all too much. Finally, Richard lowered the papers, his voice tight. You'll regret this, he hissed, and turned away. The black cars drove off, leaving only mud and thunder behind. When the last car disappeared, the crowd erupted in cheers. Trey threw his arms around Michael, and for the first time in weeks, Michael laughed, pure, unguarded laughter. We did it, Trey said. They can't stop us now. Michael nodded, looking up at the glowing horizon. No, Trey. They can't stop us. That night, the city's news stations replayed the moment over and over, the billionaire defying his empire, the street boy at his side, and the half-finished shelter standing tall against the storm. Donations poured in from around the world. Thousands volunteered. Even the government took notice, offering land and resources for new centers. But not everyone celebrated. Somewhere high in a skyscraper, Richard Hale stood by his office window, watching the footage in silence. Behind him, a voice asked, "What now?" Richard didn't answer at first. He just stared at the image of Michael and Trey on the screen. We destroy him, he said finally. Not with lawyers. With truth. The man behind him frowned. What truth? Richard turned slowly, a thin smile forming. The one even he doesn't know yet. Far below, unaware of the storm that was still coming, Michael and Trey stood inside the finished shelter. The lights flickered on for the first time, casting warm gold across the walls. Trey looked around in wonder. It's beautiful, he said softly. Michael smiled. It's just the beginning. But as thunder rolled once more outside, Michael couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his chest, the sense that the real battle hadn't even begun yet. Somewhere, in the shadows of the empire he once built, something dangerous was waking up. And it was coming for both of them. The grand opening of the Rains Hope Center drew a crowd that stretched for blocks. Reporters, city leaders, and ordinary citizens filled the square, cheering as the golden ribbon shimmered in the sunlight. For once, the city didn't look divided, it looked inspired. The story of the billionaire who gave everything to help the forgotten had united millions around the world. Michael Rains stood on the stage beside Trey, both dressed simply, no suits, no gold watches, no trace of wealth, only pride and peace. Behind them, the shelter's new sign glowed, no one left behind. This, Michael said into the microphone, isn't about me. It's about every soul this city forgot. It's about the boy who showed me the world through different eyes. Trey, this belongs to you too. The crowd roared. Trey smiled shyly, but his eyes glistened. We did this together, he said. All of us. It should have been a perfect day. But far from the applause and lights, in a skyscraper office overlooking the city, Richard Hale watched the live broadcast in silence. His jaw was tight, his eyes unreadable. A woman entered the room, a private investigator he had hired weeks ago. She handed him a small folder. You were right, she said quietly. It's all here. Richard flipped through the documents, his expression darkening. So, it's true? She nodded. Yes. The boy, Trey, he's not who anyone thinks he is. Richard's voice dropped. Send it to every major news outlet. Let the world see what their hero's been hiding. Hours later, as the sun dipped below the skyline, the celebration outside the shelter was still in full swing. Children played under the lights, volunteers served food, and music filled the air. Michael and Trey walked through the crowd, smiling, shaking hands. For the first time in years, Michael felt alive, whole. Then, the giant screen above the stage flickered. The music stopped. Static filled the air before a breaking news alert flashed across every nearby monitor. Exclusive, shocking past of street boy linked to billionaire Michael Rains. The footage that followed froze the crowd. It showed grainy security video, Trey, younger and smaller, breaking into a convenience store, running with a group of kids as alarms blared. Then another clip, a mugshot from years ago. The headline screamed, "Homeless child once arrested for theft and assault, now praised as hero." Whispers spread like fire through the audience. Cameras turned toward Trey, whose face went pale. Michael stepped in front of him instantly, raising his voice. "Stop this," he shouted. But the broadcast continued. A reporter's voice cut through the silence. Sources claim Michael Raines has been hiding the boy's criminal past while placing him in a leadership role over millions in charitable funds. Should a child thief be trusted with a billionaire's legacy? The crowd grew restless. Some people booed. Others began recording. Trey's eyes filled with tears. "Michael. I didn't." "I know," Michael said quickly. "I know." He grabbed Trey's shoulder, holding him close as security rushed forward. Moments later, microphones and questions swarmed around them. "Mr. Raines, did you know about the boy's past? Are the foundation's funds safe? Is this all a publicity stunt?" Michael didn't answer. He just took Trey's hand and pushed through the chaos until they escaped through a side alley. Rain had started to fall again, soft at first, then heavier, like the city itself was weeping. Inside a dim shelter office, Trey sat on a small chair, staring at the floor. "It's true," he said quietly. "I did those things. I stole food. I fought people. I was just trying to survive." Michael knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You were a child. And you survived a world that failed you. That doesn't make you guilty, Trey, it makes you brave." Trey shook his head. "They're gonna shut it all down now. Everything we built. You should have never trusted me." Michael smiled faintly. "Trusting you was the only smart thing I've done." That night, while the world argued online, some defending Trey, others tearing him apart, Michael made a decision. He called a press conference for the next morning. "We end this," he told Trey. "Not with silence. With truth." When dawn came, the square outside the shelter was packed again. Reporters filled every inch of space. Cameras were everywhere. Michael walked onto the stage with Trey beside him, both faces serious, both hearts unshaken. He stepped up to the microphones. "Yes," Michael began, "it's true. Trey was once arrested for theft. He lived on the streets. He fought to survive. But what you're forgetting, what I refuse to let you ignore, is why he had to." He paused, scanning the silent crowd. "While I sat in a mansion with more money than I could spend, this boy was fighting to eat. I had everything, and did nothing. He had nothing, and still gave me his blanket." The crowd murmured softly. Cameras zoomed in. Michael's voice grew stronger. "If this world condemns a child for surviving poverty, then it's the world that's guilty, not him. Trey's past doesn't shame this foundation, it defines it." He turned to Trey and smiled gently. "You once told me I didn't belong out there on the streets. You were right. But now I know where I do belong, here, beside you." The silence broke into applause, slow at first, then thunderous. Even the reporters lowered their cameras, some clapping through tears. Trey's eyes filled, and he turned away, trying to hide his emotion. Michael rested a hand on his shoulder. "You showed me what it means to live with purpose," he said softly. "No headline can change that." Over the next days, something unexpected happened. The scandal didn't destroy the foundation, it strengthened it. People around the world began sharing their own stories of hardship, loss, and redemption. Donations doubled. Volunteers poured in. The shelter became a symbol, not of charity, but of second chances. As for Richard Hale, his plan backfired spectacularly. The world saw his leak as an act of cruelty, a desperate attempt to tear down what had inspired millions. Within weeks, he was forced to resign. His empire, cold, corporate, and heartless, crumbled while Michael's new one rose, built not on greed, but on grace. One evening, months later, Michael and Trey stood on the rooftop of the completed center. The sun dipped below the city skyline, casting long golden shadows. The city buzzed with life, homeless shelters expanding, schools reopening, new homes being built under the foundation's name. "Hard to believe this all started with a blanket," Trey said quietly. Michael smiled, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "The smallest acts always start the biggest changes." They stood in silence for a while, watching the city lights blink on one by one. Then Trey said softly, "You think people like us can really change the world?" Michael turned to him, his eyes kind but certain. "We already did." The wind carried their laughter across the rooftops. And somewhere below, among the streets where it had all begun, the echoes of hope, once lost, had finally found their way home.